All right. So, welcome to our July Q&A session. We're really happy to have you all here. Really excited to get through some questions. It's been a really crazy couple months here, so we've got a lot of good stuff coming. All right, Harry, you ready?
I am ready. Hello,
Ready.
everyone.
All right. So, our first question is, if Trump had gotten his way and marched into the Capitol, would the outcome have been better or worse than it actually was, and why?
Golly. Worse, I think. I mean, we're talking now about, the fall of the French Empire or Rome or Greece. People say in the wake of his, all his monstrous behavior, democracies are fragile. They don't live forever. And it's, really true. And there comes a time. So let's just think about it. He does it and he stays president. That's it, right? I mean, that's the end of the American experiment. If it's not clear, even if in some way there's some, and I'm still thinking of France, I don't know, 1848 or whatever, there is some kind of restoration. It's happened. And it's just no longer the case that the city of the hill, the last great hope on earth, is assured the sine qua non of democratic rule, which is the peaceful transition of power and the will of the majority. You can imagine scenarios where he has his way, everything hits the fan, and then things are completely up in the air for a few weeks, and then things are restored and as they were here. Even that, even if it doesn't eventuate in a Trump rule, it's still even more fragile than it is. So I think the bullet we dodged is exactly the one that's in the question of he comes in and actually keeps things from happening. Now, he would have had to do something more, I think. Maybe he could just be, a little fat red-haired Napoleon saying the l'état c'est moi now, but presumably he would have wielded his even more immense power to have state legislatures do something to give a phony baloney imprimatur on his anti-democratic rule. But that happens as a matter of course in Russia, Turkey, places all over the world. There's a fig leaf of legitimacy. So yeah, I think seems to me we'd be curtains in a very, very important way.
Next question is, what was the FBI looking for when it raided Jeff Clark's home? Was the timing of the raid coinciding with the January 6th committee hearing in which he was discussed extensively coincidental?
Second question, I can answer first, and the answer is yes. It's just not the case that the department would they wouldn't have reason to. It sort of looks a little bit like us from here, but these raids are planned well in advance. Even it's funny. I shouldn't laugh, but even for a putsy guy like him who didn't seem to be a big danger to the FBI, you really, really, really plan it. You worry about any danger to agents, and so it wouldn't have been. They wouldn't have known when they started planning it anyway. But okay, so what are they? And it's not DOJ's style. What are they looking for? Everything, but especially documents. And I think they separately seized his phone or phones, and that's going to be the mother lode. But think of him as having engaged in criminal behavior, especially in the period from the 20th to about the 4th or 5th, the meeting, the showdown meeting where people say you do this and we are gone. Is I think January 3rd. So that's the big ferment meeting. So all during that time, we learn, although the details are still pretty vague, he's having several individual conversations with Trump. I don't think he has burner phones for that. He's doing, he's totally besotted with his own new role and, planning out his stationery saying Attorney General Jeff Clark. So I think while there could well be some tangible evidence that we could posit what it is, what they really need from him and probably God is everything he might have by way of documents. So the computer and any communication devices are the mother lode, and they got a search warrant, so that is probable cause to believe there's evidence of a crime there, and they want to be able to put together, as they don't now, as they're not really able to now, the whole course of conduct, probably criminal, from starting shortly after the election. Another interesting point about him: he seems not to have acted alone in anything important. It's not even clear he drafted that letter to Georgia. There's, a couple lawyers, younger types, whose name had been mentioned. So it's not simply him to Trump, though that's the most important communications, but it's also him to lower down folks who I think did a fair bit of his dirty work.
One more off of our pre-list, and then I'll go to chat, is where do you see the best chance of bringing Trump to justice? DOJ, Georgia, or New York?
DOJ. So I, from the start, said that Georgia's the biggest danger. It's a dagger pointing directly at him. So why should I say that? Well, first, New York, the DA there really has, I think, definitively folded his tent. He had a recommendation to prosecute from two very well-respected, seasoned prosecutors who saw very clearly and laid out the possible problems. And he came in after his predecessor, who probably would have done it if there hadn't been delays occasioned by Trump. And he just he blinked. We talked about that a lot at the time. It's he who would be left holding the bag if it's a loss. But I don't remember a time in another office where such highly respected prosecutors said, let's go for it, and the top guy scuttles it. So anyway, New York is out. There's very serious stuff happening with the attorney general, but that's not criminal. So why don't I immediately fasten on Van Willis and the DA of Fulton County? Well, I think she's totally going for it, and she's got very good evidence, at least her core crime, right? She has what prosecutors love: an audio tape, an hour-long audio tape where Trump absolutely browbeats the Republican Secretary of State of Georgia. Just find me 11,780 votes. The charge of fraud it's on the Georgia system. That is to say, it's not just a copycat crime. It really is Georgia asserting its sovereign rights. It was Georgia's election that Trump was meddling with and trying to overcome. The fact they didn't get through doesn't matter, because it's a conspiracy charge with others, including John Eastman, to defraud Georgia. So what could be bad? It's a very novel, and all of this stuff is novel, but if you stop and think for a while about the prospect of a state bringing criminal charges against a former president in a politically roiled atmosphere, you can, I think, wager that even a responsible Supreme Court would have some thinking to do about that, right? If it becomes, in our current politically turbulent times, an accepted norm, then what befalls Biden when his term is done is some cowboy DA in Texas just waiting to bring charges, and et cetera, et cetera. It almost becomes a part of the post presidency of anyone. So it is why, while there on paper it seems like it ought to fly, nevertheless it's a non-trivial question whether a district attorney in an individual state can just bring criminal charges against a former president. And what does that mean? It means as soon as she does, and I believe she will, within the next month, excuse me, within the next 6 months, by the end of the year, bring charges. As soon as she does, Trump will move. We're getting a little pointy headed in federal court, but so anyone stop me if I'm hard to understand, but there's a provision that when something's in state court, the defendant can move to remove it, can say, bring it to federal court. And I think Trump will immediately say, hey, here's a motion that says you can't do this, state court, and I want to take it to federal court to do it. And that motion, I think, is likely, and not illegitimately, to travel through up and down the whole federal court system, including the Supreme Court, and that's a matter of a couple years. So, that at least, justice delayed is justice denied, and also when a couple years are done, who's to say, and is he alive? And also when a couple years are done, things could look different in a lot of ways. Nevertheless, she might have seemed the most likely, but returning now to DOJ, the stuff that's come out in the committee, it's so bad that just thinking, of course, Department of Justice and Merrick Garland will have a lot of pause and can you do this? But anybody has to allow that it's possible. How much worse could it get? Could he have, brought a machine gun onto the floor of Congress and mowed down 500 people? There has to be a point at which you prosecute a former president. It just feels to me that we've passed that point. I'm not, some colleagues, Neil Katyal is now saying, without hesitation, Garland will bring the case. I'm not, but the odds of it have really increased, I think, since the blockbuster hearings and especially the Cassidy Hutchinson hearing. So this is all by way of saying the DA in New York is out. And then the one in Fulton County is in, but we really have to think about the whole federal court questions that are in the background. And I think the tide has risen within DOJ. So straight Vegas odds, as it were, I think now for actual punishment lie with the DOJ.
Great. So to turn to chat questions now, what can we expect from the Attorney General on the criminal front with regard to Trump and his associates?
So, it's similar to what I've just answered, and I, unlike say Neil, think it's still up in the air. When the time comes, there's just gonna be other things to think about. Even if he mowed down 525, there's gonna be a series of things that are under the rubric what is best for the country, as there was with Ford and Nixon. Now, to me, I think it's gotten to the point where this is what's best for the country, or least bad, that if he can walk, having done the stuff that he's been shown to do, it's just too toxic to the rule of law. But what a complicated question. Implications for the future, implications for our role in the international community, just all kinds of stuff. I can get back to him in a minute, but basically, I think I believe that there are. In fact, I have an email, an op-ed today about the strong possibility that they indict him for seditious conspiracy. I do think if they indict him, it needs to be for the most serious provable crime. There's a lot of, as the committee brings forward all this info in a scattershot way, which is what it's supposed to do. You have this kind of parlor game developing of how many crimes can you see. But even if you could prove them, for this situation, what you really need is the crime that best expresses and gains the social acceptance of a broad swath of Americans saying, yeah, this is what the guy did. I mean, this is really what he did. He's on the hook for this, and it's righteous in prosecutor speak that we should do it. But all the associates. So that's a point that people forget a lot. Back to Watergate. First, back to Watergate, it took a while. everyone's like, what's the big delay? And Watergate, it was after Nixon had resigned, I think, that some among Mitchell, Haldeman, and Ehrlichman went to jail. And anyway, there can be sort of significant response of the criminal justice system if some number among Meadows, Eastman, Clark, Giuliani, Stone, Flynn, etc., go to jail. So that's the associated parts, and I think you will see charges against them. So, and then Trump, I've come around to where my view is, and I've worked a lot with Merrick Garland. I think I have a sense of where he's coming from. I would never say with confidence it's happening, but I think you've heard me express sort of leaning into the notion that he will pull the trigger on it, not imminently, not before November even. The what he really wants to do, needs to do, this is more about what my op-ed discusses today, is get a pretty big guy to turn, someone who can really say, here's what Trump told me, etc. And you have to do that by charging him with a pretty serious crime. But I think they can do that, and they will do that. But I don't see how else to build at least a seditious conspiracy case. I think it's pretty clear that many people, many higher up are in the plan with Trump. How else could a Bannon say the day before, after talking to him twice, all hell's going to break loose? How else could even some of the terrorists know what's coming down? Why else what is Trump dying to get to the Capitol? But what we don't have is the actual testimony of the agreement that is integral to a conspiracy. So, DOJ has its work to do, and we'll have to proceed up a certain ladder, but asterisk. Andrew Weissman, really smart guy, great prosecutor, number 2 guy to Mueller, points out there's another way to do it. There really is just a bunch of different conspiracies and different groups here: the insurrectionists, the Stone Pal Giuliani's, the White House, maybe the Republicans in Congress, and you can conceptualize that, and the department has, as a so-called hub and spoke conspiracy, where Trump could be agreeing with one of them, but wind up being liable for everything. And depending on how they go forward and what they can prove, there are any of many candidates to be able to paint in that final, really, really important mark of his agreement. Yes, we're doing this, and it doesn't have to succeed. It's a conspiracy, and it doesn't have to be, yes, we're doing this. It's enough that you show it in a way that a normal person would say, yep, just agreed. But I think not enough, theoretically enough, but not practically enough to infer it, ask a jury to infer it. We're going to need the goods on Trump, and that's going to be DOJ's work.
All right. Next from the chat is, if the Georgia DA files, what impact will that have on a DOJ effort?
Basically none, I think.
Cool. Short and sweet. Next one is,
well, whoever asked it, if they want to follow up, but the DOJ. I mean, there could be practical, logistical, evidentiary. Don't do this now because you're weeding in our garden. Mm-hmm. But DOJ will neither think, they've taken care of it, so we don't have to. Not with something like this. Nor will they think, they've done it, we better come in because we're the damn DOJ. I think neither one.
Nice. Yeah. Who's going to turn on Trump first, and who do you think will stick with him through the end?
Boy, is that a great question. So for answer 1 is, I really truly don't know. But here's what I think. Clark and Eastman are really ready-made to be people who turn to me, because they're mediocrities that he plucks from obscurity. And if they think about it at all, he has used them so reprehensibly and so shamelessly, just got them in there, kind of, got them all like worked up with their, proximity to power. and being able to be big shots for a time. And once the dust settles, well, more than that, once the whole building tumbles and they're in rubble, they're looking at ruin, real ruin. Giuliani, he's old, Flynn, Powell, Bannon, in some ways relish their role as outlaws of a sort. These dweebs are, have been hit by a Mack truck and don't know what happened. Moreover, they're like academic types when they're really looking at 10 years, 15 years, serious years in a federal penitentiary for people in their mid 50s. I just think that's too much. And they certainly tell a part of the tale. So if the best person to get would be Meadows. He knows where the bodies are buried. Remember, he started down the line of cooperating. But I think now, he and his excellent lawyer, former deputy attorney general, have decided we're going to draw a line in the sand and not be cooperative. So anyway, this is by way of saying, I don't know, but Eastman and Clark. And as between the two of them, pick either one, but I think the slightly more squirrely one, and maybe that means the more cowardly one, and maybe that means the more likely to turn one. And where I would start, if I had to start somewhere, would be Eastman.
One more from the chat, and then we'll go back to some pre-sent questions. Notwithstanding Trump, what are your thoughts regarding the criminal exposure of Giuliani, Bannon, Flynn, Eastman, etc.?
Yeah, well, it's hard to say notwithstanding, because there might be situations in which the department would say, let it go, but for its path to Trump. And there might be, conversely, situations in which they'd say, this is a freestanding righteous case, but it's going to be jumping on the hornet's nest that is Trump. And, are we ready to do that? But I think they are full conspirators. And remember what I said about the hub and spoke stuff. Even if their little part of it is all they sort of agreed to was to try to delay the certification or commit fraud. These guys are as fraudulent as the day is long, right? They lie all the time with impunity. They honestly think, I think Giuliani does, that, it's just okay to lie. And of course, a lie, when it's serious and induces action, is another word for fraud, criminal fraud. So they can be guilty of a conspiracy, even if and all the developments of the conspiracy, even if they weren't exactly in on the final, let's hang Mike Pence and storm the Capitol. So they're looking at very serious penalties, above 10 years, and fully the same as Trump, because that's what it means to conspire, and for good reason, right? People, it's like Julius Caesar. It's Caesar is in much greater danger because Brutus is in with Cassius and is in with other people. It's not just talk. So, these guys are co-conspirators, and they're looking at full liability. If for some reason the department backs away from the whole violent January 6th part, they're nevertheless really looking at obstruction. They are, there are two crimes that were in play before you thought about the violence. One was trying to delay the proceedings, and one was just fraud on the United States to try to impede a lawful process. And the department's already looking at, has served warrants out, et cetera, the false elector stuff. So all of that, which Giuliani never really in on, and Giuliani's deep into Georgia and all that stuff. They're liable for at a minimum, and those are pretty serious, 10-year type offenses.
All right, well, we've got just under 10 minutes left, so we're going to see how many we can push through here. Going back to some pre-submitted questions, in a Talking Fed session before the public hearings began, you and your guests felt Jamie Raskin was wrong to hype up all the expectations. Have you changed your mind on that, or do you still stand by it?
I've changed my mind. Or let me put it this way: the credo of prosecutors. So it's probably where prosecutors on the show is. You got to underpromise and overdeliver, but they're not prosecutors, and they had on their minds a real desire to get America excited and want to tune in. So it was a balancing test. Saying stuff like that got people excited and want to tune in. But in the event, they really delivered, and not only delivered on day one, but I think just about every subsequent hearing, they've upped the ante successfully. It's a really splendid, they've had some professional help, but it's really been splendidly executed. And so we haven't reached the worry about this is you reach a point at the end. And if they'd been more low key, you'd have said, oh, that's pretty strong. But since they were so, hyperbolic about it, you say, that's impressive, but it's not what they promised. I don't think that happened. I think it's every bit as big as what they promised. They now have a new dilemma on their hands because they've got a flood of new evidence coming forward, things that they want people to hear and we would want to hear, but will it not kind of keep with the very well choreographed and paced series of hearings so that down the line a new hearing becomes, oh, this again? And they're extremely conscious. You could be cynical about it, but given the importance of what they're doing and the big gap in our historical record without them, I think it's all to the good. They're very conscious about presentation, and it just gets better and better and better. So I think they did blow the roof off, and so I think Raskin said it, which made people tune in, and then they delivered again and again and again, which made people keep tuning in. So yeah, I think I was wrong there.
Nice. Another one pre-submitted. Since the Supreme Court has become a political extension of the Republican Party, does the Democratic Party have any way to protect the laws it passes from being overturned in a biased way by the conservative court?
So we could talk a lot about the preface and the extent to which I agree with it. I'm obviously very chagrined by the court. I don't think I'd characterize it that way, but the short answer to the question is no. I do Michael Cohen sometimes, which is a funny thing, I think, for me to do. And some people pointed that out. But I did this week, and he turns out to be a huge Animal House fan, and maybe most people who are on it have seen it, but I was put in mind of, so we got to vote and hit the ballot box, and I was put in mind, I don't remember the guy's name. It's before Belushi, as Blutarski says, we don't give up. It's not over till we say it's over. It's the big crazy guy with the handlebar mustache saying it's over. The dean dropped the big one, and they did. And they are really my namesake, but not my relative. Leah Litman at Michigan calls them the YOLO court. They've really come out of the box in this first year, and they are raring to go. And it's like, they're going for it right away, not in sort of baby steps. So, and they really aren't. I will say this much: they're just not constrained by precedent. They're really ready to just enact the rationale of a kind of conservative dream case that they came up thinking about. I mean, this is my basic objection to the court. Not that the three of them will do anything to have the Republicans win, though there is a very worrisome concord between cases that have deep impact for the Republican Party and which way the court goes. But they just all came of age. They went out searching for and successfully. These are the guys that came of age at the most extreme side of the whole legal spectrum, and really trashing 90% of the law out there. And they're just out of step with the legal community, with America, etc. And that's a dangerous place to be, but they definitely are. So, the short answer to your question is if there's an argument they could go to that involves a big change, and maybe in free exercise or maybe in the administrative state or whatever, they'll do it. And they are not, the court in general for about 15 or 20 years has been really unshy about pulling the trigger on striking laws down. The very first, judicial review, their vaunted power, first time it was ever used was in Dred Scott. And they went 100 years only doing it once, but now of late, boom, 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 boom. So, there's some limits of reason and integrity, but not a lot, at least as we sort of think of it. And we're going to see, without doubt, more important democratic initiatives that will go on, and then at the end of the day, a 5 or 6 person conservative majority on the court will slap down. That's where we are now, and for a generation, it's a really, really woeful situation.
People have said that the Attorney General will need to consider the impact on the country of indicting a former president. Isn't that overstepping his responsibility? Should that factor only be a presidential authority?
So first, it's a great, great question. We're in uncharted waters. Second, it's a great, great second question, because you're right. Whose job? So it's somebody's job there. And it really, to me, does feel like it's the president's job, or the president in consultation with Garland. Now, we have this weird situation where Biden, I think, is basically saying, do whatever you want. I don't want to hear it. No responsibility. And in that case, if Garland is lonely on the seat, I still think he has to consider it. You could take the view, why should the president, a former president, be any different from anyone else? If you've reached the threshold and you can prove a crime, that's the end of the story. But I don't think that's the best and most sophisticated view for our democracy, even though I see it. So it does, I think, have to be considered. And I agree with the implicit assertion of the questioner that that's president stuff. That's subject to the electoral check. That Ford arguably went down for pardoning Nixon, and he made the decision that, by the way, I don't know if people on the call disagree with. I think history is largely vindicated. I was a little Nixon hating hippie, and at the time, but I think it's been largely vindicated that he did do the right thing for the country, and that matters more than one creepy former president. So I do think, though it's a rich question, but I do think those considerations need to factor in, and I do think it's the president who needs to do them first and foremost, but I'm not sure that will happen. And if it doesn't, I don't think Garland should, and he certainly don't think that he will sit there and just, do the same checking the box exercise as he would do if it were not a former president.
Yeah. Nice. All right. Well, we've got just under a minute left to wrap everything up here. It went by so quick. I can't even believe it.
Sorry, guys. Okay.
Wish I could get to way more of your questions. If we didn't get to them, please keep sending them in. We're here every month.
Choose fast. Yeah.
Yeah. And we thank you all so much for coming. And if we answered you, we will be getting in contact with you guys about getting you some free Talking Fed swag. So look forward to those emails, and thank you all so much for coming.
Bye, everyone.